Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Huddle with myself, Latifa, and my colleague, Sabera.
Today we're going to be discussing how to homeschool. It's a question that we often get from parents who are transitioning from another schooling and trying to get into homeschooling.
Like, where do we start? What do we do? If I wanted to start homeschooling tomorrow, what are the first steps I have to take? So we're going to talk you through it, inshallah. And we'll start with step number 1.
Wait, hold on. So how long have you been homeschooling, Latifa?
Shh. I've been homeschooling for, 22 years now? That's a long time. That sounds old.
Yeah.
I've been homeschooling for about 22 years. I have homeschooled 6 children of my own. And then I have many other families that I've consulted with and homeschooled with and co-opted with. And yeah, it's been a journey, and we have many people, college graduates, homeschooling, big homeschool advocate here.
Yeah, so for me, my journey's a little bit different. My kids went to traditional public school, then we transitioned them into private secular school, and now we're finally homeschooling. So I'm kind of newish at this, so I've been kind of taking your steps, and it's been going really well, alhamdulillah. And I think the first thing is really understanding the purpose of homeschooling, just spending time with your spouse and really kind of figuring out what it is about homeschooling that's attracting us to that pathway.
Yeah, and you don't want to be from a place of fear. Like, you don't want to just say, I'm going to homeschool because I don't want my kids to. You really want to be proactive and positive. Like, I want to homeschool because it is very important to me to have a close relationship with my children. I want to homeschool because I think it's the best way to provide opportunities for them to develop their potential. I want to homeschool because I want Allah to be the center of their learning, and I don't want to have them in a secular curriculum that removes God. So these reasons should be affirmative, they should be positive, and you really need to deep down remember what your purpose is and what you're doing.
Yeah, and then so once you have that, I actually encourage parents to write that all down. We'll come back to that when we talk about the mission statement, but I think starting off just with the why and then kind of taking stock, right? Like, where is your child at when it comes educationally or, in his personality, or what do you want to bring in your child through homeschooling? Yeah.
And before we take stock, though, I want you to look at our Ma'asumin, look at in the Quran, look at the prophets, look at their children. There's a famous dua for Prophet Ibrahim and Prophet Zachariah. They're praying for their offspring. They're praying for good spouses. They're praying for good offspring. Go into our tradition and really find out, what does it mean to raise a child? Like, why is it important? What are the things that Islamically I'm supposed to give my child in order to fulfill my duty to Allah?
That's right.
And so remember that God should always be in the center of what you're doing and your purpose, driving you along, because there will be bumps in the road. And when you get to those bumps in the road, you want to have a very solid foundation for helping you to navigate those bumps.
Yeah, and then you take stock, which means really kind of understanding where your child is at, socially, spiritually, I guess intellectually, of course, physically, right? And emotionally, and figuring out where you want your child to go after that. And then also kind of understanding how your child learns, because often if your kid is transitioning from a school environment, you may not know how your child learns best. Mm-hmm. So it's really important for you to take some time to understand how you learn as well as your child.
And you really have to focus on yourself. If you're a perfectionist, and if that's been a struggle for you in your life, then you want to really focus on and be aware of that so that you're not creating that same dynamic within your child.
Because we bring baggage, right, from our own educational experiences. So being aware and recognizing what you like or what your experiences were as a child when it comes to education, and then just kind of making sure that you are kind of finding a path that works best for your own family is important.
And if you're high anxiety, those coping strategies that you use to kind of keep yourself regulated, you need to be applying them as a part of your normal schedule so that, again, you're not passing on those behaviors to your children. Or, you might just have a child who's also very sensitive, and you want to give them the tools to navigate that in a way that they would never get in school. You want to also take stock of how you learn. because it may be that you present things, you teach things to the way that you learn, but it may not necessarily be the way that your child learns. And so you want to know how you learn. And you want to really kind of, when we talk about taking stock, Sabra mentioned this, you really want to hone in on that relationship with your child. You want to make sure that you know your child and your child knows you.
Yeah.
You kind of get into this kind of symbiotic relationship. And it's very important that you focus some time on just getting to know one another. And we'll talk about this a little bit when we start talking about deschooling, but this is a very important part in taking
It is.
stock.
And I feel like if your child doesn't trust you, right, nothing that comes out of your mouth will matter for that child. And so often what happens is when your child is going to school, the teacher becomes like their God, for instance, right? Like whatever teacher says, it goes, even in your house. But then when you are your child's teacher, what happens then, right? Yeah. So you want to really make sure you have a very strong bond, that they trust you, especially when you are not just their mother, but then also their teacher. So you have two hats you're wearing.
It's worth taking the time, not teaching academics, to build the trust.
How do you build trust? Like, what does that look like, right, between a mother and a child? Mm-hmm. Especially when your child has been going into public school for all of his life, and now they're coming out of traditional schooling, and you're going to be homeschooling the next few months. How do you do that?
So this is a really good question, and it depends actually on the age of your child. But one thing that's really important for all children is that, and hopefully you've been doing this all along, but when you say something,
you mean it.
You mean it.
Yeah.
And if you promise something,
you follow through.
You follow through. Whether positively or negatively, you follow through. Sabra has a really funny story about this.
I do. I'm really big on following through, because as teachers, again, you have to do the same thing. So in a classroom, you have to build trust with the children in your classroom. So I'm really big in my house about following through. And it's interesting because one time, I think my son was, I don't know, like 10, 12 years old. He was kind of kicking my seat from the back in the car. And I told him to stop multiple times. And my husband was driving the car. And finally he turned around. He's like, if you do it one more time, I'm going to throw your shoe out the window. And so when my husband said that, I told him, you better mean it. And I made him stop the car. And we were on the highway. Throw his shoe out the window. And so he had to walk home, or wherever we were going, walk barefoot, basically. And so it really taught him a lesson, like, what he says or what she says, it's really going to happen.
Yeah, and, life events happen, and you can say to your kid, after lunch, we're going to go to the park, and then the pipe bursts and you can't go to the park. You still have to go back to the kid and say, I know I promised you we would go to the park, but this emergency happened, so here's what we're going to adjust and here's what we're going to do. But you never leave it unsaid. Like, the kid is not going to be like, oh, mom said we're going to go to the park, but the pipe burst, so that's why we didn't go. They're just going to not trust you because you said something that didn't happen. So you really want to make sure that whatever you say is going to happen. Right?
Yeah,
to the best of your ability. Of course, inshallah, but to the best of your ability. So that's one really major part of building trust for your kids. I think a second part of that is just kind of being there, being in their space, sharing activities, and letting them know when they fall, they have you to be there. And this, especially when you get into the adolescent years, can be really funny because they spend a lot of time pushing you away, and you just have to be there.
That's so true. One of the great pieces of advice you gave me when my children were coming into their adolescent years was spending one-on-one time with them. And I have 2 kids, right? So it never occurred to me to do that as a parent, just taking time out, and even if it's half an hour, once a week, taking Ihsan out somewhere where he enjoys, or something that like an activity he enjoys, right? And that makes a huge difference, because when we were going through this, like, I don't know, this weird phase in our lives during COVID, that really, really helped him. Just pulling him out of our normal day-to-day schedule and then taking him out for breakfast, and just kind of just listening to him, right? There's a really great book, I know you know it too, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen and How to Listen So Kids Will Talk. It's a really great book that kind of gives you the guidance on how to build how to build a relationship with your child too.
Listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. Comment. Even it's not always the best ideas. It's not always something that resonates with you. But listen openly, comment, exchange, talk. And I think the third thing I would say as far as building trust is maybe take on a hobby together or an activity that you're doing, something new that you do together that kind of builds a bond in a different way. It's always nice. Let them see you be vulnerable learning stuff so that they can learn to be vulnerable with you learning something new. And also expose them to things that you're good at and better than.
So when do you, what do you recommend about like when to do all of this? Like how do you take time to do build this relationship?
I like bedtime. Bedtime because I had so many children. There were so many more of them than me. I would stagger bedtimes. And each of my kids, I had a bedtime ritual for them. And we would do our different thing, our goodnight thing together. But they were staggered 30 minutes or so that I could spend time with each of them and doing that ritual. And that went a really long way. Even to this day, they remember our bedtime rituals. And even to this day, I can go into their rooms like close to bedtime and just kind of hang out. And they're in their 20s now. So,
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So we've kind of built this trust, right? We figured out our purpose. We built this trust. We've taken stock of where our children are at. Now what?
We need to get together as a family and write a mission statement. What are we trying to do? What are we trying to accomplish? What is this homeschool journey going to look like for all of us? And you may think, oh, I only have a 3-year-old. I only have a 5-year-old. They do have something to contribute. They do have something to say. You don't want to involve them in the nuts and bolts in a really long process, but you do at some point want to bring them into the process closer to the end, and everyone contribute to this mission statement. So you might be thinking, what goes in the mission statement? What is it all about?
Yeah, so a mission statement really is just a really brief statement that outlines your core values, right? What is it that you really believe as a family, and what are you trying to accomplish with your family? So it's not always it's not everything to do with education. It's so much more, right? Mm-hmm. So what are you trying to accomplish in your life, right? So what I tell parents or myself is figure out your end goal and work your way backwards. Mm-hmm. Right. So what are you trying to accomplish in the next 15 years? What do you want your child to be in the next 15 years? And like character, profession, all of that, right? You want, like, as a Muslim, what kind of a being do you want him to be in this world?
This is really important, especially when you have those toddler years. You have this kid, you're walking down the street and they just lay down in the middle of the sidewalk and they start screaming and pulling clothes off. And you're like, what is happening with this kid, right? And
you got to look beyond that.
You have to look behind that. You have to look like, okay, in 10 or 15 years, what do I want this screaming monster on the ground to be like, right?
Exactly.
Like what do I want that person to be like, and what steps do I need to take now to get that person there? You know?
And that becomes like your light, right? Your guiding light, that mission statement. So that way, when you have this statement that you've written, you kind of tack it up on your refrigerator. You can keep coming back to that when you're trying to make a decision when it comes to homeschooling or when it comes to like life choices or decisions you're making for your family. It becomes really your, your go-to, right?
Yeah, it's like your focus, your foundation. It keeps you on your path. That's what it's supposed to do. And it will change. You'll have to refine it as people age. You'll refine it as you change situations and circumstances in your life. But it should be a living document, but it should be something also like consult it regularly.
Yeah.
It should remind you of that why we discussed.
That's
it
right.
should remind you of what you're trying to achieve in the future. It should remind you to stay grounded and stay focused. And like Sabera just said, when you're making decisions, simple decisions, soccer or football,
right?
You know?
Right. Should we take vacations here? Or should we take vacations there? Right?
Are we watching this movie or that movie? You can go back to your mission statement and get guidance on how to make these decisions, even the simplest to the most complex.
Yeah,
decisions.
and when we consult parents, we actually walk them through the whole entire process of writing this mission statement, refining it and whatnot. It takes a few weeks, actually, if you do it the right way, I guess. And then you can tack it up and keep adding to it until you get it right.
Yeah. You definitely want to refine it and get it right. And then when you're all in agreement with it and you have your why and you've taken stock and you've built some trust.
Then comes a curriculum.
And you have your family mission statement.
Yeah.
Then you can start thinking about the curriculum.
It's so funny because most often people want to jump through and tell me what program or curriculum to use. And I'm like, wait a minute. I need to figure out all these things with you before I can tell you what's right for your family.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we have like so many different approaches to education.
That's right.
We have so many different curricula and
for every homeschool student that exists, there's hundreds of curriculums you can choose from. And so that's the thing. If you know all of the things we talked about, it makes it so much easier to sift through all of these curriculums that are out there.
Yeah, because it can be very overwhelming and it could be very wasteful because you can purchase these curricula and you get into them and you're like, this is not working for me. This doesn't work for me or my family. So rather than going in blind, you can go the other way. And then there are plenty of websites and resources that review curriculum and they show you and tell you what is best, how they've experienced them. And then you can use those reviews to kind of say, oh, this sounds like it's something that might work for my family, and it'll get you closer to what you want. And then there's one last thing you need to do. Not everyone needs to do this. You may be homeschooling from the start, but if you've had your children in public school or secular school or private school, even Islamic school, you have to go through a process of deschooling.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Right? So before you jump into teaching your kids the different subjects, you want to kind of pull them out of the mindset of yourself and your children, out of the mindset of going to school.
Or traditional school, right?
Right.
And I think because it's just homeschooling is such a different type of learning, you have to kind of decondition yourself from the things that you knew before or what education was before. And then that way you can start off with a clean slate.
And hopefully you've already kind of gone through this process as you've done your why and you're taking stock in your family mission statement. But when you are thinking or conceiving of homeschooling, if in your mind you have, okay, I'm going to have to divide the day into 8 periods. I'm going to have to teach math, science, social studies, English, language arts, and then I'm going to have to do PE and music. You're not being the most efficient homeschooler you can be.
Yeah, because that sounds like a lot. Right?
That's
sounds overwhelming.
Yeah. Right? And if you're like me, you're homeschooling 4 to 5 children at a time.
That's impossible.
It's impossible to do that in one day.
Yeah.
So you want to kind of examine what your ideas are about schooling, and then examine how realistic they are for the family that you have. And then you want to go through actually challenging some of the myths that you've accepted as the standard for education.
Right.
For example, I don't have a degree in math, so I can't teach my kid math. That's not true. You might be learning math with your kid, but you've taught your child to walk, you've taught your child to talk, you've taught your child to clean themselves, you taught your child to use manners and tie their shoes, and well, shoes don't have shoelaces anymore, but all these kinds of things you've taught your child. So why don't you think you can teach your child math? Yeah. You can teach your child anything.
And as classroom educators, we know that when we are in the classroom, like in a school, we're not taught how to teach math, really, right? We're given a curriculum and it's pretty scripted and you just go through it. What we are taught in our educational training is how to manage a classroom. And so we don't have to worry about that when we're homeschooling. You're just teaching 1 or 2 kids or 4 at best, maybe. So it's really not like a thing, right? It's not like you're missing out because you don't have a degree in education and you can't teach your child.
And the secret sauce is really love gives you way more traction than the amount of information you can convey.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
the love and attention and the relationship you have with your students or your
way.
children goes a long way for what they learn and what they do not learn, and how empowered they feel to learn and how empowered they feel to chart their course as learners.
Yeah.
All right. So nuts and bolts here, right? You have children 3 children, they're in public school, and you want to homeschool them. What do you do? Sabra.
Yeah, so I would definitely pull them out. The school will most likely have you sign a paper, like an exit, some kind of a document. Pull them out immediately. You don't really have to notify anyone else besides the school at that point. And then I would kind of figure out the laws in your homeschooling state, right? Kind of go on to Google and search homeschool laws in Maryland, for instance. And then you kind of see what the laws are. Most often you have to notify your state or your county that you're homeschooling. There's a document for that. You mail that in, and then you're ready to go.
Most important thing here is that you don't have to jump into academics. You can if you want to.
That's when I would do deschooling, right? Take at least 2 weeks. I would say maybe 4 if you can. Ideally, take 4 weeks to deschool. Deschool means take them to field trips, take them to museums, right? Take them to the library, and maybe you do a deep dive on a special interest topic that your kid wants to learn about, and you go to the library and take out a whole bunch of books and take field trips on that. Just take some time to just learn about each other, I guess, right? Spend some time together. And then in that process, that's when you're putting together your mission statement, pulling out curriculums that kind of align with your mission statement, forming a group if you can, right?
And depending on the age of your children, you could do a whole exploration on what is our homeschool going to look like. And you can like imagine it and then create it. And Sabra just brought up a really good point. Finding other families that are doing it is really, really nourishing and important.
Don't go at it alone.
If you are alone, it's going to be much more difficult than if you have a support group. So try to find 2-3 families that you can work together, homeschool together, bring your kids together a couple times a week. It'll make your journey a lot easier, and it'll build in support for you when you're trying to make big decisions. And there'll likely be different people with different levels of experience, and that can help you as well.
Yeah, one thing I didn't realize until I started homeschooling was like this whole underground network of homeschoolers who are providing classes and activities just for homeschoolers, and like museums offering homeschool days. Some museums even offer free programs for children, right? There's so much. It's so rich. And I had no idea any of it existed until I started homeschooling. So there's a lot of Facebook groups that kind of, open the world to these resources. And one thing I also realized was homeschool moms are so generous, and they offer so much to other students and other families. So if you have questions, just go on Facebook and just start asking questions, and you'll get like hundreds of answers. So if you're looking for a specific class, like my child wants to do Algebra 2, for instance, where do I go to take this in-person class? You'll get all the answers from other homeschool moms.
Yes, the homeschool underground is amazing.
Yeah, like that's something I had no idea even existed from the surface.
And really, really over the last 10 or 15 years, it's just exploded. There are so many things. I cannot think of one thing that you would miss out from if you're homeschooling. I mean, the sports are there, the opportunities for extracurricular activities and enrichment and internships, and so much self-development, career development is all there.
And even like consultants, right? Like, of course, you and I consult, but there's so many more consultants out there who are really working with parents and making sure that all of their check boxes are checked, but also just supporting parents through this process, because there is so much out there which can also be overwhelming, right? So I feel like it's nice to have either a consultant or a veteran homeschooler kind of helping you navigate this whole underground world of resources.
And if you don't have any of that at your disposal, that's when you call us, because Sabra and I will hold your hand through this process and support you. And we are homeschool parents, and we are veteran homeschoolers, and we are educators, and we are consultants. So you got it all in one package.
Yeah. So we're homeschool advocates. Are there times when we shouldn't homeschool? Like run us down through some scenarios where you feel like it just wouldn't work for parents.
One thing that's really important when you're homeschooling is that both parents are on the same page. They may not necessarily be carrying the same load, but they should be on the same page about homeschooling. They should both want to do it. They should both be in agreement about doing it. And they should either invest one with the power to do everything, or they should be making the decisions about homeschool together. And if you have disunity and disharmony around whether or not to homeschool, your homeschool situation is going to be rough. And so I think in that specific example, you would be better served with not homeschooling and going to Islamic school.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a big believer of Islamic schools, right? So for me, I think it would be like if you can't find an Islamic school that's viable, that's a viable option for you, then yeah, homeschool is always there as an option, as a backup. And then my other question is, a lot of people bring this up as well in terms of income, right? So obviously if you're homeschooling, now you're transitioning your family into one income family. How does that work, right? Like you're having to let go of a salary when you're homeschooling.
Well, my favorite saying, it's always about your priorities, right? When you homeschool, if you feel like you've done your why and your family mission statement says one thing and these are the top priorities for you, then you will have to make sacrifices for them. So if you're transitioning to one income family, you may downsize your home. You may move to a different location. There may be some things that you give up materially to support this homeschooling. And it's not for everyone. So if you don't want to do it, don't. But there definitely have to be decisions. There's sometimes very tough decisions that are made in order to keep homeschooling on that single income.
Yeah.
And then, there are situations when the homeschooling parent is also a full-time working parent. And then that comes with both parents working creatively to make it work, right? And I've seen that be successful as well. And so you don't have to downsize, but you have to make other kind of sacrifices in time and energy in order to make the homeschooling work. Another
case I feel like I would recommend a parent to not homeschool maybe, or suggest that, is when they have a lot of, needs, like high anxiety, for instance, right? I feel like it's when you're homeschooling, there's so much you're juggling. And so for high anxiety parents, if they're not able to cope, check that in, it becomes really difficult to homeschool. And then on top of that, your child might have their own issues that they're kind of dealing with. I don't know, what do you suggest? I would find it really difficult as a parent to homeschool if I wasn't emotionally stable, I guess.
So here's the thing, right? If you're emotionally unstable, maybe your children get respite from you during the school day when they go, or maybe they just carry your instability with them and it's always with them anyway. So
interesting.
I think that if you're emotionally unstable, you should be trying to get help for that. And I think as the person who's emotionally unstable, homeschooling is not right for you because you can't regulate yourself enough to actually do the job. Does it make it worse or better for your children? I don't know. I think it would make it more difficult for you, the homeschooling parent, to do the healing that you need in order to be whole. So yes, I would say if you're emotionally unstable and self-aware enough to know that, which generally don't go hand in hand.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Then I would delay homeschooling until I got myself on a more even keel. I think I actually don't agree with Sabra. I don't think that Islamic schools are better than homeschools, but I do understand that Islamic schools are a very powerful tool and should be used and are open. I mean, they're an option for everyone. But I think that there's something about what a parent can pass on to a child that no one else can do.
That's true. That's true.
And even if you don't do it all the way through high school, if you just take a couple years, especially those early years with your children, and just give them of yourself, I think it equips them to do so much else in their lives.
Yeah, but I feel like homeschooling requires such a commitment. It's just, I don't see everyone kind of, rising up to that. I think that's why I think Islamic schools for a lot of families is a great answer, because I feel like if one parent is going to work, the other mom wants to go into the classroom and volunteer, but then some days she doesn't want to, she has that flexibility. Whereas homeschool, it's like 24/7 all the time, right? And that's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah. I don't deny that. It's a lot.
Yeah. So
I do believe it's a lot, and I do believe that a lot of people are not committed to it, and you shouldn't do it if you're not committed to it. But I do believe it's the best thing you can give your children. The elephant in the room. When we talk about homeschooling, the number one thing we get asked is about socialization. Sabra.
Yeah, where does that fit into the schedule, right? So often parents think that when they're homeschooling their child will be lonely and miserable and they won't have any friends, which is not the case. Actually, I find that when you're homeschooling, kids are more socially adept than their counterpeers, right, in traditional schools. And that's because they have so many more opportunities to interact with the real world, like adults, at field trips, co-op parents, or if you're part of a learning pod, there's other adults there. They're interacting with those adults. And you're often kind of educating not just the child, but their peers as well, like the siblings, right? There's siblings and there's friends. So they're actually just getting so many more opportunities to socialize than we would think.
Yeah, when kids are in school, they basically are with their same age classmates, and there's usually such a high number of them that their individual actions and personalities, they're not held accountable for those things.
And also, furthermore, I feel like in classrooms, not many classrooms give opportunities for children to collaborate and interact with one another, right? Mm-hmm. It's a lot of independent rote memorization that these schools are kind of working with for their children. And so where in homeschool world, I feel like there's so much more collaboration involved.
Across different ages, your little siblings, little people, older people, high schoolers interacting with fifth graders and the adults. So it becomes rich. But also you get these opportunities to take your kids to the doctor. And when I would take my kids to the doctor is like, okay, what are they eating? I'm like, ask him. I'm there. They go to the supermarket, they go to the library, they ask questions, they are learning how to navigate the world. And it's not just me. We don't just sit in the house all day with our family behind closed doors. We actually are in the world exploring and learning about things around us. They're signed up for sports. They're doing extracurricular activities. They're learning languages. And in this area, we're blessed to have some community schools that allow the children, even though they're not attending the school, to take certain electives at the school. So then they also have a school community where they are socializing with their peers as well. But the biggest thing I have to say is throughout all of my years of homeschooling, whenever I took my children to any situation, the people there would say, I cannot believe how well behaved your children are.
That's so true. I get that too all the time.
And I can't believe how mature your children are. And it really is about...
It's because we've coached them, right? How to interact and how to have those etiquettes, where if they're in a traditional schooling setting, they're not getting that coaching.
Yeah, it's that individual attention and bringing them back into the remembrance of Allah. Like not just behaving well, but why are we behaving well? Remembering what our guide tells us to do.
Yeah, and furthermore, I feel like I have 2 teens, right? I'm never home. At this point, we've outsourced so many of our classes. And so they're interacting with so many different kinds of people, and their classes are all over the place. One day I'm in Virginia, one day I'm here in Maryland, like in my county, and another day I'm in another county, right? So they're interacting with so many different kinds of people, and I've very intentionally done that. So they're able to interact and, be tolerant of others and whatnot. So it's kind of nice to have that. Whereas if they were in one school, you'd be in a bubble, right? You'd be interacting with only one type of people. So it's really nice, I feel like, when you outsource very strategically at that point. I would do that in high school. In elementary school might be a little bit different. You do want to keep them in a bubble, but then slowly you kind of extend that bubble out.
Yeah, middle school, 1-2 classes
exactly.
Here. But I mean, like, I had one of my children play sports from 3rd grade until 10th grade, the same sport, the same team. I had another child from 6th until today who's in the same sport with the same karate school. So it's you put them in situations where they develop themselves.
Exactly.
And you get to be there, give them that one-on-one coaching and attention so that they develop into good people.
All right. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you got a whole bunch of information about homeschooling. And we're always here to support you in your journey. So if you can please subscribe, share, like our posts, that would be wonderful.
And if you're not a homeschooler, and you have some questions about parenting, character development, child development, we can also help you with that. We write curricula, and we consult with Islamic schools as well. So we're here for all of that.